called Just Mercy, and it depicts the story of Mr. McMillan that you saw on the left, Jamie Foxx, who was convicted of murdering a white woman and was on death row for many, many, many years until this lawyer came along and began to plead his case over and over and over again until he was heard. Our parable and our clip today are clearly pointing toward how we understand and think about justice, or its lack. In both cases, people are pleading their case. In both cases, people are persistent and resilient. In both cases, those pleading eventually get what they want. However, in the case of the widow, it isn't as explicitly clear that what she is after is actually justice. It could be, according to the Greek, vengeance. We don't finally know if she is in the right here. We just know that she badgers the judge. The Greek suggests even threatening him until she gets her way. And since he doesn't really seem to care about God or what's right or wrong, he eventually just caves and gives her what she wants. Because of Luke's narration, Luke writing that portion of the gospel, scholars diverge here on how much of this is Luke interpreting and how much of it is what Jesus actually intended. There's a tendency to make a simple conclusion here that we should be like the widow, praying ceaselessly. But friends, this breaks down a bit, does it not? We should relentlessly badger and threaten God to try to get vengeance? And then, does that make God the unjust judge? Broken as that interpretation is, it is a popular one, but alas, it doesn't really provide for justice. It has been used to say, just get in line. Pray, but don't do anything else. If things aren't happening, you should just pray more. If you pray enough, then God will respond. But wow, is that a problematic interpretation? It implies that we essentially control God if we just try hard enough. That we can badger the source of all love, the creator of the whole of existence, into bending to our will, even our desire for vengeance. This interpretation makes God rather small, rather unreliable. Who's praying the most is going to get their way. It turns grace into a meritocracy and justice into a thing to be bought. And when that happens, we are worshiping those things instead of God. We are worshiping our ability to persuade and bribe. We are worshiping our egos, and God becomes a pawn in our games. When we oversimplify these parables that are always meant to challenge how we think about the world and ourselves, we can use that to fuel the very systems of oppression that are problematic to begin with. Instead of transformation, they become confirmation of all that we already believe. And for those of us with privilege, that works just fine. Thank you. On closer inspection, though, there is another character at work in this parable, one that is still at work outside the system and not swayed by the judge's disregard. If the judge doesn't care about God after all, how would we jump to the conclusion that we should treat God like the widow treats this judge? If instead we look at this example as acknowledging our corrupt and unjust systems, the widow isn't right per se, the judge isn't right per se, and yet we cannot fully remove ourselves from the systems available to us. What if instead it beckons us towards hope and toward what we can do in spite of flawed systems. That these unjust and corrupt systems may or may not eventually dole out the justice we seek, but that God is at work in all of it. That we should devolve God into one of our systems or authority structures, and certainly not something we can persuade or control, but instead that we learn to trust ourselves and God at work within us. We do what we can toward justice the best we can, and then we trust. When we believe that God is the ultimate authority, we can begin to have a real hope. Despite what rulings or systems don't go our way or work as we expect. If we can believe that God is ultimately in charge, then there is no lose. There is learning, there is even suffering, but in the end, it still all works together for our good. I think that there is a reminder here in the balance of the both and. We both do all that we can, work relentlessly towards justice as best we can, despite our problematic systems, despite systemic sin that taints all of the world. We still do all that we can towards justice, and we don't have to put all of our hope on getting our desired outcome on our will or power, because God is still in charge. God will eventually use it all together for the good of the world and transformation and salvation of all of God's beloved children, every single one. But not one of us gets there without challenge. Now, we could all sit around and debate whose challenge is worse than whose, but it doesn't essentially matter. You matter. Your suffering matters, and yours is exactly the thing that will transform you. It is exactly the thing we will seek with all of ourselves to overcome for ourselves and for others. And when we do, despite setbacks, despite wrong turns, despite all the players being somewhat wrong, despite the system being unfair, we will be transformed. We will be saved. Not, finally, from eternal damnation in a fiery pit, not in my belief anyway, but from ourselves and the overwhelming evidence for despair. We will learn hope, good news, gospel, and a faith that will see us through it, whatever the it is. And I believe that by the time we get to the end of it all, somehow, some way, it will all make sense. We will see how it worked for good, and essentially that is the heaven we're already embodying, that we've always wanted. A confidence and assurance that it's all going to be okay. That we can't avoid the dark places, but we don't have to stay there forever. And if we are open to it, right alongside the work, we can see that heaven, that kingdom breaking through, fueling the work, giving us hope and showing us what salvation really means. And sometimes we even get what we want. After today, this church as a whole will be shifting its focus towards justice, towards how we might make the world out there more like the kingdom Jesus taught about. Each and every one of us has gifts and skills that can help do that. Amen.